Welcome to the 8-Week Security Challenge. My name's Mark O'Shea, and this is kicking off the 8-week process where we'll be going through a variety of different security-related technologies. But before we go too far into that, let's talk about some of the topics we'll be covering and then start introducing the different team members. So we've got a number of different things we'll be working through as we go through today to give you an introduction to some of the things you should be expecting us to go into more detail over the coming weeks of this practice establishment that we're running now. But I'm just going through because it looks like we don't have people's screens updating just yet. For the team members, there's myself, Mark O'Shea. We've got Kenny, Ian, Danny, and Marnie. And we come from a variety of different backgrounds covering different technologies, some people coming from a marketing role, some people coming from the technical role, some people coming from sales and licensing. So hopefully over the course of the next 8 weeks, we can really go through and give you a good idea of some of the best practices that we've seen around the world. Sorry, someone took over as presenter for me, so you weren't seeing the slide builds that I had. So let's do that again. So welcome everyone. So back to the intro, so the 8-week security challenge. So let's talk about the agenda. So we'll cover the team, we'll talk about how the challenge works, what you should expect on a week-by-week basis. And as we go through the main part of today's content, you'll see the security opportunity, you'll get to hear about some of the different Microsoft technologies we'll be focusing on, as well as what actually makes up a security practice. So how does the challenge work? Well, sorry, my slides are jumping ahead here without me intervening. So how the challenge works is that each week you'll receive content on a key topic and an action to complete. So there'll be a mix of content to read, assessments to complete, or community calls for you to attend. There'll be additional resources that will get posted on the security challenge page, and this week what we've made available are some research papers by Gartner and Forrester. What these will do is address the local market opportunities for security and compliance offerings in the context of global market trends. During the 8 weeks, we're here to support you, and shortly, if you haven't been invited to the Yammer community already, please let us know so that we can make sure that we can get you in and that you can share this information. So what I'd like to do first of all is hand off to Ian Hurd, who'll talk about the security and compliance market opportunity.
Thanks, Mark. Hopefully everybody can hear me coming through there. And thanks to everybody on the phone. I'm just seeing up to 115 or so participants. So that's fantastic to see. Really appreciate your commitment today. And really looking forward to talking to you today about the security and compliance market opportunity that we see at Microsoft, both for the market as a whole, but more importantly for you as partners. My name is Ian Hurd. I'm Modern Workplace Lead at Microsoft. My responsibility and also the responsibility of our team is around the entire Microsoft 365 portfolio from a product and marketing perspective. So in effect, we're the local bastions of the go-to-market around everything ranging from productivity through voice, security, compliance, and also applications such as Power BI and Teams on the analytics side. So just kicking on through, I think if I framed really where we're seeing the market at the moment, it's a market of absolute change that I've just come back actually from the Australian Institute of Company Directors annual event. And it was just incredible to see the recognition of board levels through all of our customers right now around digital transformation and how it's fundamentally going to change the way that they're structured at a board level, the innovation they drive in their organization, the recognition that things are changing so quickly, so rapidly, and how they address that change. And it's certainly not an understatement to say that this is without a doubt the fourth industrial revolution. And personally, I think it's right at the start of that industrial revolution. If I compare where we are today to where we were a few years ago, it's coming on leaps and bounds, and it almost makes me feel like I was lazy for the first 15 years of my career, thinking that IT was moving quickly. The reality is it pretty much did nothing compared to what it's done in the last 3 to 4 years. But this is very much the start. If I look at the first and second industrial revolution, what we saw there is massive drives in workforce productivity, massive changes in the demographics and wealth distributions of countries as a result of these revolutions. We haven't got there yet in digital, and although there are proof points, the reality is there's so much further that we can go. And our customers recognize it, and they want to engage with us around these discussions. And the underlying piece around all of this opportunity, though, is a huge threat. And that huge threat is that right now the cybercrime market is the largest criminal market in the world, surpassing even the global drugs market. It's a level of sophistication that we've never seen before. And it's not just, what I would consider the historical hackers of this world, where they're, either kind of weirdos in sheds or rogue state nations. These are sophisticated criminal organizations who work on shift patterns, who provide their staff with holidays, who have hundreds, if not thousands, of members of staff focused on driving malware and different viruses into the marketplace, and exchanging them on the dark web and in Amazon-like websites. So this is a level of sophistication that's huge, and the reality is that the cost to the Australian marketplace is also huge. We believe that last year was a $17.5 billion effect on the local Australian market as a result of cybercrime, and that the average breach for a business is $17 million. And then relating that back to markets, this isn't just targeting big corporates. 43% of those attacks are happening on small businesses. And for those small businesses that are affected, 40% of them are out of business within 6 months. So this is very real. And with areas like mandatory breach reporting coming in now, GDPR in Europe, which are really starting to drill down on the governance and the compliance behind the organizations need in terms of reporting these breaches, we're at a stage like never before where security threats can directly affect the valuation, the prosperity, and even share price of organizations across Australia. And without a doubt, this digital transformation we're seeing is also driving massive change in the way that we work. 41% of employees say mobile business apps change how they work. We're also seeing that 36% of people in the enterprise are mobile right now, not working from an office location. 85% of enterprise organizations keep sensitive information in the cloud. So there's a massive change there between where data resides in the cloud and on premise. And the reality is most organizations are currently living in a hybrid state between the two. And then lastly, 80% of employees use non-approved SaaS apps for work. And I think this is a really interesting one. The amount of times that we see IT organizations refusing to accept this point and really just trying to secure the applications they provide is actually very worrying. When you look at people say like WhatsApp users, 1.3 billion WhatsApp users around the world, 1.1 billion of them are daily active. I can tell you now there isn't a customer in the world who doesn't have employees exchanging company information on WhatsApp today. So what are organizations doing to protect that? What are they doing to ensure that end-to-end they're providing a secure, compliant, and well-governed security posture for their organization? And as a result of all of this, without a doubt, the security perimeter has changed. We're moving from everything being on-premise in an enclosed environment to very much something very different, where we have multiple different suppliers, multiple different applications in multiple different points around the cloud. It's unrealistic for organizations to only protect what they supply. The reality is they need to protect against the threats of any application on any device anywhere. And the other part of that is it isn't just restricted to the office, because your IT environment and our customers' in IT environments are changing fundamentally. No longer is it just looking after your infrastructure and the devices you provide, but with the advent of areas like Internet of Things, we're seeing, and much more diverse e-commerce models, we're seeing points of penetration expanding all the time, whether it's a sensor in an office, or if it's even sensor on your tracking systems and your distribution networks. This has fundamentally changed, and the ability for IT to provide a security department that is going to be able to stop each one of these environments being compromised is just simply unrealistic. And it's moved away from the fact that cloud is seen as a compromised position for organizations or a risk to organizations. The reality is that intelligent clouds and intelligent security in the cloud is the only way for organizations to ensure that they're protected, to ensure that their risk profile is optimal, and to ensure that their shareholders and stakeholders aren't at risk. Because the reality is that every single one of these areas represents a potential breach. So the other side to that is there's a chicken and egg here, which is a lot of IT organizations are going, stop using WhatsApp, or stop using all of these applications in the cloud. Stop using what you want, and we want to give you heavily restricted and heavily governed applications that actually, as a result of the amount of security compliance, etc., wrapped around them, are not intuitive and are not easy to use. And of course, the net effect of that is that organizations and users end up creating shadow IT and ignoring IT's guidance and deliver higher levels of exposure than ever before. So this really is about enabling productivity without compromising security. And so it can no longer be a position of, are you productive or are you secure? The reality is that in the new world, we need to be secure and productive going forward. And so that security needs to be integrated into everything you do. It needs to be embedded in every application, and it can't just be an over-the-top suite that's an afterthought in an organization. So this is why we came together with Microsoft 365, and I know that Kenny will come after this presentation. Kenny will talk about the security solutions that we have available at Microsoft through our Microsoft 365 suite of solutions. But what I would say about the security market as a whole is that there's just an unrivaled opportunity for partners to create value, both value for their own income statements, but also create value for their customers, so that they can begin to have a seat at the board table. They can raise themselves in the value stack of the customer organizations. And I think when we look at areas like Microsoft 365, which brings together everything from productivity to collaboration to voice and video, analytics and security, enabling yourself to get up that value stack using security as the thin end of the wedge, to then be able to grow Microsoft 365 through that organization, gives you an opportunity to expand your addressable market significantly within your customer organizations. And when I talk about security, it's with all of the trends and the movements that I've just mentioned before. What we're seeing with security is just an ever-increasing rise in the security marketplace here in Australia. The Australian cybersecurity market today is $7.5 billion. But I think really importantly is security's share of the overall IT budget. And we're seeing a steep climb in that addressable percentage of that total addressable market of the IT budget. So moving from 22% of overall IT spend in 2014 up to 28% in 2016. I think the second part of that today is that it's probably no surprise as to the areas and the parts of and organizations that are purchasing these areas most. They're basically the ones that have got the most to lose. So if we look at areas, say, like banking growing at 9.5% overall spend on a compound growth rate, annual growth rate. Areas like healthcare, utilities, state, local government, and telecommunications, all being big areas of growth. And look, it's probably self-explanatory why that is. If we look at areas like, say, WannaCry and Petya, that heavily impacted areas, say, in the UK around the National Health Service, the second largest employer of people in the world behind the Indian railroads. And the sensitivity of the data that they look after every day, the sensitivity of data that state and local government looks after, banking looks after, and the terrible effects to the overall productivity of a country if the utilities and telecommunications networks go down, then they are absolutely prime time areas to be targeting for security discussions. And so let's break this down a little bit. And when we talk about opportunity, I think it's great talking about billions of dollars and the big markets to go after, etc. But let's maybe just break this down into a couple of buckets as to where we see this opportunity for partners. I think firstly, I spoke to you before about where Microsoft 365 lies. And the reality is, if we look at a typical, let's take a medium and large enterprise. We've got a huge enterprise base at the moment of Office 365 E3. And by the way, the values I'm showing here are US dollars. So I recognize the Australian market has some changes around local currency and how we address our prices, but I think this is a really good illustration of where we see addressable market. But if we start off, say, in a medium and large enterprise at Office 365 E3, what we're seeing now is a EMS being used as a great attach motion in many discussions with customers, as is advanced threat protection with Office 365. So attaching advanced threat protection to any Exchange Online deployment. And straight away, that $20 then becomes north of $30 in terms of an addressable market opportunity. You then bring that further up the stack to include capability around Windows 10 with Microsoft 365 E3 and some of those workloads that we have around Windows security. And again, that goes up to then $36. And with Microsoft 365 E5, which is really our pinnacle, and I know Kenny will go into depth there around that package, we're seeing the overall addressable market going from $20 with Office 365 E3 up to $60 with Microsoft 365 E5. So a 300% increase in addressable market opportunity for you as a partner purely on licensing. I would also say that Microsoft 365 Business, targeting that maybe less than 150 seat markets, which I believe Mark will touch on a little bit later, is opening up again new market opportunities to upsell from those small business SKUs that we've had for Office 365 in the past and drive that security discussion. We're also, in terms of the areas that we're seeing customers spending on security, again, we're seeing this increase consistently, but I think the biggest piece around security is that this is not solved by technology alone. We're seeing a fantastic knock-on opportunity for services. So if we look at the security addressable market, it's about 32% of overall spend is actually on security technology. The rest is on associated services that you as partners can deliver and take advantage of. Areas like managed services, integration services, consulting services, and also other services that can be delivered around that. And digging into those, there's really two areas. One is on the project base, and the second on the managed service space. In the project side alone, we're seeing that enterprise project services around security deployment, holistic security deployment, globally we're averaging around $542,000 of project services in terms of per customer, rolling those out in the enterprise space. Even in the SMB space, rolling out the right security services, identifying security posture, consulting with our customers is driving nearly $46,000 of professional services and project-based service opportunity within our clients. The second part is then on the managed service, and I really do underline the value to our customers around the right planning, enablement, and support operations that are able to really drive around managed services. And the need that they have, they don't just want to look after this themselves. It's, the whole piece now around the sophistication of the security market means that many of our customers are ready to hand the keys over for their security to Microsoft and their partners. And this is where we're seeing some great opportunity on the planning stages, 60 to $100,000 worth on average of first phase advanced security workload projects, $100 to $150,000 of enablement services. And the average margin across all revenue streams being north of 35%, nearly 39% for areas like managed and support operations. So there's a great opportunity here with managed services. And having come from the partner world in the past myself, I see this as a prime opportunity for partners to engage with Microsoft, to engage with our customers, and really generate a great annuity base for your organization based around the thin end of the wedge being security. And then the next part is also, just really leveraging that discussion I said before, that the need really for customers to hand the keys over to Microsoft and their partners to deliver that end-to-end service. And security as a service is becoming an awful lot more prevalent. So, if we look at our overall service offerings, or as a service offerings, security really comes out on top in terms of organizations' propensity to purchase. So if you look, many organizations are already moving to security as a service. But if we look at the organizations expanding or upgrading that capability or planning in the next 12 months in that red box around advanced threat detection, security analytics, etc., we're seeing a big expansion there. And we're seeing a market rotation towards security as a service as a whole. And so just to close this out before I hand over to Kenny, I just wanted to just reiterate, for us, this is an extremely exciting marketplace. I think, you've seen from Microsoft that everything that Microsoft does is being built on trust. And without a doubt, we are banking our entire brand on us being a trustworthy organization for our customers and for our partners to trade with. And the underlying linchpin of that is how we leverage our intelligence security graph and our solutions that I know Kenny will talk about to be seen as the most trustworthy technology organization in the world. We see this as an extremely relevant market for our customers. It's an immediately relevant conversation to get to the C-suite, to sit there with the key decision makers in an organization and really drive home the value of what that end-to-end Microsoft 365 proposition can deliver. And lastly, we see this as the services that Microsoft deliver, the technologies that Microsoft deliver, as being just the start of that journey. And this isn't a journey that we can execute by ourselves. We absolutely, see value and want to double down on helping develop the security and compliance services that you as partners have for our customers, and really work with you and engage with you over the next 8 weeks to build out that capacity in our organization. And not just that, how we go on to be extremely successful together in growing this marketplace and capitalizing on this $7.5 billion market opportunity that we have in Australia today. So with that, I'll hand over to Kenny to talk about our security value proposition and the key pillars in which we play in.
Great. Thanks, Ian. Good afternoon, all. My name is Kenny Singh. I am the security technical lead for the partner organization in Australia. In this role, for the last 12 to 15 months, I've actually been working with our leading partners across Australia on building end-to-end security practices. Over the next 20 minutes, we want to take the opportunity, given the market opportunity context that Ian has set, to basically describe how Microsoft is actually addressing the market opportunity around security that exists out there, how we're actually investing in a holistic security story that actually spans all aspects of a security conversation with a customer in a customer's specific context, specific business and technical context. So without further ado, let's get into it. So there's essentially 4 pillars that we actually have to our security story. There's identity and access management, there's information protection, there's threat protection, and there's intelligent security management. As Ian alluded to before, we actually come from a world where things in traditional IT were actually quite different. The way information was actually protected in an organization was to basically keep the information within the bounds of a organization's corporate network, or perhaps a managed service provider which was thoroughly vetted by the organization. Information was basically made available only and only on devices that organizations actually had direct control over. And over channels that the organizations actually had direct control over. So, for example, from the corporate network, or perhaps by extension through a VPN connection into the organization's corporate network. Now, all of that has actually changed in the last few years with the digital transformation revolution that we're actually going through. So, Invox, bring your own devices. So, the reality of the IT environments today is that you have users walking in with their own devices. They actually have their own devices, iPhone devices, Android devices, Windows personal devices that they actually want to use with the organization to access data and be productive. You also have departments in organizations who basically want to be agile. So they basically want to get onto SaaS services that can give them immediate productivity boosts in their environment. So given that reality, the way we've actually been thinking about security is to actually protect at the front door. So that's the identity and access management piece. Threat protection, that's basically all about ensuring that in this hybrid world, where you might actually have information on premises, you might have information in the cloud, you might have that information being accessed from different devices, from different platforms, from different locations. We actually have a pretty comprehensive threat detection, protection, and response mechanism. So let's start with identity and access management. With identity and access management, we actually provide you a solution that does not just protect you on premises. So for a very, very long time, Active Directory, NTLM Kerberos, security groups, distribution groups, and all that good stuff that actually goes with Active Directory deployments has actually been protecting on-premises environments quite successfully. We actually give you a seamless way to extend Active Directory into the cloud, into the cloud service we actually call Azure Active Directory, which is a lot more than basically an identity and authentication mechanism. It actually gives you multi-layers of security. You basically get quite a few advanced features like multi-factor authentication. You get self-service password reset, which basically means that you can very, very seamlessly reset passwords in your organization. So users can actually drive the password resets in their organization. It actually gives you access to information using your identity on any device and any platform that your users choose and that the organizations choose, and from any location as well. Yeah. So I just wanted to sort of land that message again, that we, with the identity-driven security approach that we actually have in place, don't rely on information being accessible only on devices that are controlled directly by the organization. Irrespective of where the device actually comes from, irrespective of what the platform of the device is, you can actually make information accessible to these devices at the locations that the users choose to in a completely protected manner. One of the most significant capabilities that we actually have in the Azure Active Directory platform is a capability called conditional access. So conditional access is the capability that basically brings everything together. It gives you a framework to basically say, if the following conditions are met, I actually want to limit the control of the user in the following ways. So on this slide, this is perhaps one of the most complex conditional access framework slides we've actually created at Microsoft. It actually gives you a list of so some sample conditions that you can basically apply in a conditional access context. And it actually gives you actions that can basically be applied. So if I just spend a minute or so on this, right, because this is a very, very significant capability we actually have in Azure Active Directory. So from lots and lots of our enterprise and government customers and SMB customers, we actually hear that they don't basically want to apply very intrusive security controls to applications that don't actually need it. So let me just give you a very distinct example here. Is it really necessary to get a user to do multi-factor authentication to an app that does not contain business critical data? Right? Or is it possible that we actually say only if certain conditions are met? For example, the user is actually accessing the information from a location that the organization does not trust, or from a device that is not directly controlled by the organization. should we actually warrant the user to do multi-factor authentication? So that's basically what conditional access actually offers you. So conditional access just doesn't give you protection, or this framework just doesn't extend to the Microsoft ecosystem. It actually extends to the third-party SaaS app ecosystem as well. We have a product called MCAS, that's the Microsoft Cloud App Security. This product basically extends the conditional access framework to other applications as well. We actually have different actions that you can perform if certain conditions are met. So for example, if any of those conditions on the slide are met, you can basically ask the user to do multi-factor authentication, or you can actually ask the user to reset their password, or you can basically limit the access to information for that user. So let's use an example of limiting access to information in a very specific scenario. So let's assume for 1 second that Ian is sitting on an airport kiosk and he actually wants to access a document that's stored in the Microsoft SharePoint Online tenancy. In that case, what we can basically do is we can put controls in place. We can limit Ian's access in a way that he's actually still able to execute the task successfully that he wants to execute. But we can basically say, right, we're actually not allowing Ian to download documents at scale using the OneDrive for Business Sync client. So what we basically do is we actually limit the user's access in a way that the user is able to be productive, but does not compromise the security footprint of the organization. Yeah. So it's a very, very powerful capability. I just wanted to mention one more point before we actually move on from this slide. There's one more condition there called risk-based conditional access. So with that condition, we actually bring the power of the entire machine learning based information that we actually have in this thing called the Intelligent Security Graph that we'll actually cover at length later on in this presentation. We actually bring that into the conditional access framework. So what that basically means is, let's take a specific example. Let's assume for 1 second, just staying on Ian's example. Sorry about that, Ian. I'm just going to use you as a guinea pig. So let's staying on Ian's example. So let's assume for 1 second, Ian always accesses the Microsoft corporate information on his machine from Melbourne. Now, what actually happens is that suddenly the system sees that Ian's logged in from Melbourne, and then 15 minutes later, the same set of credentials were actually seen to be logging in to a different Microsoft service from Sydney. Now, that's an impossible travel scenario. Yeah, so that's one specific use case for when the risk level for Ian would actually be elevated for Ian's identity. The second example is that let's assume for 1 second that there is a specific machine that Ian actually uses, and that machine basically accesses only certain information during certain hours. Now, what we basically see is that Ian is actually accessing different systems, so where the behavioral pattern is actually quite different from how the behavioral pattern actually is in accessing applications and on the respective devices that Ian actually uses. Once again, that can basically constitute a risk event. And we actually have 3 different levels of risk. So you can have low, medium, and high risk. And basically what you can say with this risk condition is you can basically say, if the risk level is medium, hypothetically speaking, as an example, I actually want the user to do multi-factor authentication. Now, the very nice thing is that if at that stage the user, which in this case is Ian, is successfully able to do a multi-factor authentication, will actually treat that specific risk event as a false positive. And that information, once again, will actually be fed back into the massive repository of intelligent information, security information we have in the background called the Intelligent Security Graph. And then in the future, that risk event before being flagged will actually look at that information that was basically stored in the Intelligent Security Graph, right? So it's basically a feedback loop that forever is improving itself. So it's a very, very sophisticated system, suffice it to say. So with that, let's move to threat protection. As Ian alluded to before, the threat landscape has actually expanded quite rapidly over the last few years. With the advent of all these different themes like bring your own devices and consumerization of IT and lots of data actually being in the cloud, the threat landscape is more vibrant than ever, and it actually requires a multi-pronged approach to basically protect an organization and its information. So when we think about threat protection at Microsoft, we actually think about threat protection in terms of the detection of a threat, protecting from a threat, and responding to a threat. We have a range of products that basically constitute the threat protection story. So on this slide, you'll actually see the different products we actually have in place. So the good news is that one of the products on that slide, so Azure Advanced Threat Protection, just went to general availability this morning. So it was actually public preview till now. But basically, with this expanse of threat detection and protection technology we actually have, that's illustrated on that slide, you can very comprehensively protect not just a customer's on-premises information or on-premises environment. You can actually protect their investments in the Microsoft Cloud apps in Office 365 and CRM Online and so on and so forth. But you can also protect any other SaaS application that actually is driven by Azure Active Directory or that's integrated with our Cloud Access Security Broker, what I actually alluded to before, MCAS, Microsoft Cloud App Security. So just a couple of very quick points on advanced threat analytics. So that's the tool that we actually have for protecting the on-premises environment. So once again, all that magic of determining what is the usual behavioral model for a user, and when there are anomalies detected in that model that basically don't sort of strictly adhere to how the user basically uses the applications and the devices in a customer's environment. All of that information is basically detected and scanned by Advanced Threat Analytics for on-premises environments. So ATA is an on-premises product. It actually hooks up with domain controllers on-premises, and it constantly scans your network to basically detect any malicious activity, any suspicious activity, or any security risks that might actually be in the environment. And it'll actually proactively flag the threats. You can think of Azure ATP, Azure Advanced Threat Protection, as a threat protection tool that actually does something very similar in the cloud. It also gets signals from on-premises, so it actually has the ability to protect both your cloud environment and your on-premises environment. Then we actually have the threat protection products that are basically built into Office 365. So you have Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, which basically gives you protection to your emails and now to your documents stored in Office 365 as well. It does two things very, very well. There are actually a lot of other things it does, but let me please just highlight these two things that it actually does brilliantly. So it actually protects you against any malware that was basically sent into your organization through attachments, through email attachments. What it'll actually do is it'll basically spin up a VM in the background that's completely transparent to a user. It'll run that file to basically see if there's any runtime malware manifestations in that file, right? So it's not just a protection from malware at rest. It's a protection from malware when that file is subjected to a runtime environment. Yeah. So that's the first value add, very significant value add that Office 365 ATP gives you. The second thing it actually does, which it does really, really well, is safe links. So assume for 1 second that I actually send Joe an email, hypothetically speaking, right? And that email basically has a link, which is a phishing link, and I actually prompt Joe to come in and log in with his credentials or her credentials and basically access a specific application, or to reset their credentials, as we generally get in phishing emails, because the credentials are compromised, or any story that I actually choose to weave around that. With Office 365 ATP, the best part is that when Joe clicks that link, we actually apply a click level protection, which basically means that the destination that link actually points to is scanned in real time, and only if that destination is deemed safe will Joe actually be able to access the destination. So we actually call it safe links. And then we actually have a range of other threat protection and threat detection mechanisms in Office 365 and threat intelligence. We have the same thing with MCAS, so Microsoft Cloud App Security. It can actually protect or detect and respond to threats in third-party applications. So I'll give you a few examples of applications that CAS integrates with, so Box and Dropbox and G Suite and Salesforce. So there's a range of applications that CAS will integrate with, and it'll actually extend that threat detection and protection capability to third-party applications. So that actually brings us to the information protection story. So this is the third pillar of the Microsoft end-to-end security story. So when we think about information protection, we think about it in terms of assessing what information is confidential in an organization. Once we've actually assessed, classifying that information, once the information is classified, protecting that information, and once the information is protected, monitoring for sensitive information, or should I actually say that the life cycle or sensitive information as it actually progresses from one step in its life cycle to another. So we actually have a range of products that constitute the information protection story. Azure Information Protection is at the heart of the information protection story. We have a tool called AIP Scanner that you can actually use to assess on-premises information stored in file shares and SharePoint repositories to determine whether the information is sensitive or not. You can actually do the same thing in Office 365 through Office 365 Advanced Data Governance. It'll actually allow you to scan your Office 365 environment and detect what information is sensitive or not. We basically use regular expression searches to determine the sensitivity of information. You can do the same thing in third-party applications using MCAS. So once again, it's a very comprehensive information protection story that spans on-premises, Office 365, and third-party SaaS applications as well. Classify, once you've actually assessed the information and you've deemed the type of information you're actually working with, whether it's sensitive or highly confidential or just general, high business impact, low business impact, medium business impact, you can basically classify the information as such. We offer two ways of classifying information: manual classification and automated classification. So in the Office applications, you can either, so an administrator can basically configure Azure Information Protection in such a way that users can either classify the information manually, so they'll actually be able to apply tags through the ribbon, or we can actually apply tags to it directly. And then once you've classified the information, then we actually allow you to protect the information. So for example, you can put rules in place that basically say, if the information is deemed sensitive or highly confidential, I don't want that information to be sent out via email or for that document to be shared outside the organization. So you can actually put all those protection policies in place, and those protection policies will actually travel with the document as it actually moves through its life cycle. So for example, if you say it's a highly confidential document, I don't want it to be shared outside the organization, I don't want people in my organization, hypothetically speaking, to be able to print it, that information will always travel with the document, irrespective of whether that document actually happens to be on a USB stick or a computer or in Office 365. And then the final piece in the information protection puzzle is, or information protection story, is monitoring. And that's basically all about viewing how the life cycle of a sensitive document is basically unfolding in the organization. So we actually give you a nice monitoring dashboard, which basically gives you a view of your sensitive information, who's actually access to your sensitive information, all the way to the point where the information is destroyed. You also have the ability to basically detonate the information in the sense that you can basically destruct the information. So that brings us to the final piece of the end-to-end security puzzle, and that's intelligent security management. So this is basically the glue that actually holds everything together. So this slide basically gives you some of the key statistics on the information flowing into the intelligent security graph. There's over 450 billion authentication attempts that basically happen to Microsoft consumer and commercial services across the globe. The heuristics and all the underlying information about the level of risk associated to these authentications is all stored in the intelligent security graph. There's over 200 plus commercial and consumer applications that we basically take information from to basically be absorbed in this intelligent security graph. And it actually drives all these different applications that you basically see on this slide. So it feeds information into the Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection System, into ATA, into Azure Advanced Threat Protection, Office 365 ATP, and a range of other products. So the final slide basically shows you the entire information protection, threat protection, identity and access management, and intelligent security management pillared story that Microsoft actually offers you. So there's a range of products here, and over the course of the next 8 weeks, we'll actually send you information and we'll basically walk you through information on subsequent webinars that basically goes a lot deeper into each of these different areas. So on that note, we're actually going to pass it back to Mark.
Okay, thanks, Kenny.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay. So there has been quite a focus so far on a lot of the technologies that do have the enterprise branding associated with them. But it's important to understand that a lot of those technologies are just as applicable to SMB customers as to larger enterprises. But that doesn't mean that SMB customers don't have offerings that are specifically targeted for them. So what we'll be focusing on as far as the SMB, thread of the next 8 weeks is really like a heavy focus on Microsoft 365 Business and combining that with the appropriate Windows 10 devices. So, making sure that SMB customers are purchasing devices that can actually enable some of these security capabilities that Windows 10 has been delivering. But what we'll also be doing, though, is making sure that you get a good understanding of, when and where Microsoft 365 Business is actually right for those customer scenarios. Because we know that just because an organization falls under a particular user count doesn't necessarily mean that the set of technologies that they need is any less than a larger organization. So what we'll really be doing with some of these conversations is starting off with situations where if a customer has already got Office 365, if they've already got an Office 365 SKU, an E3 SKU, we may have a very different conversation with those SMB customers versus those who are buying new or have already got Office 365 business licenses. So we'll make sure that you do get a good understanding of, if you do need to start aligning different products alongside each other to make sure your customers get the right solutions. As we go through the next few weeks, you will start getting a bit of a better understanding of how these different products stack up and which one's right for your customers. Now, moving on to the final piece, which is just a few wrap-up elements around, why as Microsoft partners you should be, very interested in establishing security practices. Some of the things that we'll see in terms of the stats in the next few slides and then some of the customer requirements. This is showing that basically we've got Australia being listed here as number 2, just slightly behind Mexico in terms of the percentage of respondents who are saying that there's like an absolute shortage of cybersecurity professionals in the country. Now, this is something that we know that even if an individual is skilled up, we can get much greater scale out of them working with a partner organization as opposed to it being someone who is just inside of a larger organization. When we talk to customers and ask what are the types of needs that they have, well, different companies of different sizes are going to come through with different requirements. But really, a lot of this starts coming down to what are some of the security services and related services that they can effectively outsource or have their partners provide for them. Now, as we move on to the National Association of Corporate Directors, who did some recent studies showing that most organizations do see the major impact that it's going to be for them if they don't go through and start securing their environments better in, not just reacting to security threats that after it's too late, but also making sure that they're being able to be a bit more proactive, making sure that users are better educated. So we know that some of the types of attacks we're seeing are only going to get stronger and more frequent over time. So making sure that we can really address these with a variety of different solutions. Now, there's a lot of information on this slide, and the idea isn't to go through everything, but instead it's just really a matter of talking about, what are some of the types of things that may be natural extensions of some of the types of work that you're already doing, perhaps even with some of the Microsoft technologies you're doing. So, again, you'll see here that we can start plugging different things in as this builds out. But there's really, a lot of different opportunities. So, if you're working with Office 365, if you're already working with Azure AD, if you work even with like a lot of the on-prem solutions, there are additional capabilities that we can start rolling in that customers may not realize that, they could even be licensed for them already. It's really up to you as the partner to go in and start enabling some of these additional services. Now, some of the types of outsourced services that we frequently hear from customers as being probably some of their more in-demand ones. So advice and consulting, auditing, so making sure that that processes being followed, incident response, monitoring requirements, some of the different threat intelligence. So how do we actually get an understanding of what's going on inside of our organization? And with some of the technologies that have already been covered by Ian and Kenny earlier in the session, you're probably already starting to think that, some of these things we've already started touching upon, but obviously we will be going into these in a lot more detail over the coming weeks. Now, some of the additional top-of-mind items for organizations. Some of the big ones up here are threat detection and response. Like we see the different numbers where, usually it's somewhere around the 6-month mark before an organization realizes that it's been breached. So how do we get faster detection? How do we respond faster? How do we make sure that nothing has really, that we can sort of, stop those kinds of things from happening and block them much, much earlier on? Now, also some of the things that Kenny started talking about, so things like the data protection, but also that big focus on identity and access management, which is something that Microsoft is pushing very heavily with Azure Active Directory. Now, below that, you'll see other things such as endpoint security, which will be, one of the big things that I focus on as we do go through the 8-week challenge, but also, on-prem network security is still an important one in there as well. So what are some of the things then that you should be thinking of in terms of conversations you should be having with your customers? So these are some of the top ones that have been called out at a global level. So, basically coming through and first of all, educating your customers, making sure they have got a good understanding of where they are via the assessments that you provide for them. So after assessments have been provided, go through, give them advice as to what they can do to improve that, and then potentially be the ones who are then also deploying those services or possibly working with other partners who are going to be deploying some of these services alongside the existing offerings that you have. Now, some of the other things that you'll start seeing in here, and you'll see referenced in multiple locations moving forward, things like a managed security service. Now, I know that a lot of you who are on the call are coming from the MSP side, so we've sort of had things like managed desktop, but all of a sudden, what can we start doing to make sure that we can really start enhancing those offerings with some of the different managed security services that are coming into the market? Now, I'm just checking with Marnie to see how we're going for time, to see if we've actually got a couple of minutes for Q&A. So Marnie's actually got a OneNote in front of me with a couple of the questions. So I can actually start off with the first one, and then I can get Kenny to fill in anything that I leave out. But it's someone asking, so Marnie, you're supposed to put the people's name at the beginning so I can say their name, but asking how ATP determines if links are safe. So this is actually a really good question. There are a variety of different data sources that Microsoft is pulling in from. So and a lot of other things actually start sharing some of that same type of data. So think about all of the different feedback mechanisms Microsoft's got in the intelligent security graph. So, all of the, the Defender scans that are going on, known types of attacks that are taking place, certain types of activities that may be going on across multiple Office 365 tenants at the same time. Also, even things like what you're getting with if you're using Smart Screen on your Windows desktop. A lot of this is like shared information and I guess elements of shared technology, where it's making decisions based on whether it's, so first of all, just because it's a site that may have been trusted in the past doesn't necessarily mean it's currently trusted. These things are always being evaluated. There's the global security community is also sharing a lot of this type of information. But I'll let Kenny jump in now because he's probably got a couple of additional things to add on top of that.
Yeah, look, I think that actually covers it really well, Mark. I was just going to very quickly mention that just from a process perspective, basically what we actually do with Office 365 ATP Safe Links is that we actually rewrite the links. So when you basically click the link, that link is rerouted through our Office 365 ATP protection mechanism. And given all the sources that Mark alluded to, we actually deem whether the destination of the link is safe or not.
Okay, thank you very much, Kenny. So I've got a couple more questions. Does Microsoft 365 E3 or E5 include, or can it include a Windows 10 enterprise subscription-based license? Yes, so by default, the Microsoft 365 E3 will include the Windows 10 E3, but once you step up to the Microsoft 365 E5, that's where Windows 10 Enterprise E5 is included. And the differentiator between the Windows 10 E3 and E5 SKUs is that's where you start getting the inclusion of the Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection capabilities. So important things to remember when you are talking about Windows 10 Enterprise subscription licenses or Windows 10 Enterprise licensing in general is it's not a base operating system. It's an upgrade that can be applied to effectively, Windows 7 onwards Pro licensed devices. Okay, so a question from Saif Asan. Can you name a few examples of implementation services on Microsoft products? So I'm not exactly sure the specifics of what if there are any products in particular that you were mostly interested in. So I'll get Mani to monitor that one for you. And from Arpit, if a customer already has Windows 10 Enterprise, how do we upgrade them to M365 considering they have already paid for enterprise licenses? Well, because the Win 10 Enterprise piece is an ongoing subscription, so I guess first of all it's going to depend on the channel that you're working on. If it's in the CSP channel, then you taking them away, you're basically swapping them over to Microsoft 365 Enterprise, including the Windows Enterprise license, while at the same time removing the Windows 10 E3 license, for example, it's the net result is the same. The user's machine will still stay active because, as long as the user has got a Windows 10 E3 license assigned to them through AAD during that period, then you really shouldn't see any issues. Now, if it's going through some other type of one of the volume licensing programs, I'm going to step right out of that conversation and we'll call in Danny Beck in the future to address that one for you. Okay, does ATP scan links in attachments? Not too sure. I'll have to check into that one for you, Damien, unless Kenny or Ian can answer that one.
That does ATP scan links that will basically send inside attachments in an email?
Yes. Also, if let's say someone, I'll guess a PDF attack might be a nice example of this with embedded URLs.
Yeah. So look, what we can actually do is we can get a confirmation from the engineering team on that. But what we can confirm, though, is that we have extended the Office 365 ATP support to documents as well. So, for example, if you actually are working on a document that's basically that has a range of links and you share it with someone, we can actually apply the Safe Links feature to that as well. Now, whether that actually extends to attachments that come in via an email, we can get a confirmation on that. So we'll take an action to do that.
Okay, so we've got a couple more questions. This one's from Phil. With regards to scanning on-prem infrastructure, are there any limitations and does it have the same features as scanning Office 365? So I'm not exactly sure which specific feature because we do have, I guess, several different scanners or on-prem connectors that could be referenced. And got one more from Tom. For advanced threat protection, if I have a user with ATP licenses applied, does it cover the shared mailboxes? I'm not too sure of that one. I'll let Kenny or Ian know that. Otherwise, we can get our friend Danny Beck. We're going to basically say Danny Beck anytime there's a licensing question we can't answer. So anything on your side, Kenny?
One for Danny.
I think it's one for Danny.
Yeah, okay. And Mani's actively monitoring the feedback to see if any of the things where I was trying to get some clarification on the questions. Okay, also safe. Response just came through at the bottom. Can you get back to the original? Sorry, Kenny, can you mute? There's a little bit of feedback.
Oh, is that? Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so again, I'm not quite following the question. We'll take that one offline because I'm not quite sure what the specific what what it's really being asked to, and I don't know if just doing it this way is the best way to achieve it. But anyway, we need to sort of wrap up, and we still have one final slide, which is the what's next slide. So any of the questions that didn't get answered, we'll basically lock Danny in a room for a day and not let him leave until he answers some of those licensing questions. So next week, Speak of the Devil, we'll have Danny Beck, and we'll also have Marnie delivering a video where they're talking about some of the licensing pieces here, but and also some of the benefits that you get as members of the Microsoft Partner Network, so you can get a good understanding of what's going to help you start building some of these practices out. So that information will start coming through to you next, but then we've also got the next community call lined up, which is the 13th of March, which is more of the technical focus on building out some of these security capabilities. So with that, what I'd like to do is thank everyone for joining us. And again, if you haven't been able to get access to the Yammer community, make sure you go through, contact Marnie, and Marnie will make sure that she supplies the information to get you through. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day and very shortly the weekend.